The air that Saturday morning smelled of wet dust and quiet thunder. The storm had passed, leaving the desert sky rinsed in gray and gold. I opened the windows to let the smell and rain in New Mexico always carries a kind of mercy. The glass felt cool beneath my palms as I wiped it clean. The porch light was still on, though the sun was already burning through the clouds. I meant to turn it off later. That was before the phone rang. Carolina's voice was trembling thin as paper. "Mrs. Ellis, is someone else here?" I stopped breathing. "No," I said. "Why?" There's a woman upstairs." For a moment, I could hear only the soft click of her fear. Then something colder silence. I told her to get out, to lock the door, to wait by the mailbox. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. I called the police, the words spilling out too fast, then drove home with both hands shaking on the wheel. When I turned onto my street, the world felt wrong too, still too neat. The porch light was still glowing in full daylight, its weak yellow pooling against the wet bricks. I remember thinking even the house looked scared. 2 officers were already there when I pulled up. One older, kind eyes, but tired. The other young face unreadable. They searched everything: closets, attic, basement, even the crawl space under the kitchen floor. Nothing. No footprints, no open window, no trace of anyone. Carolina sat on the curb, pale eyes wide and empty. I held her hands. They were shaking so hard, I could feel her pulse through her skin. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered, though nothing felt all right. She said it again, that she'd seen a woman in white standing at the top of the stairs, hair loose, silent, then gone. The older officer patted my shoulder. "Probably a reflection, ma'am. Light can play tricks in these old houses." Light, always light. Mark and Jenna arrived not long after the cruisers left. My son's face was a mixture of concern and something else that polite pity people save for the elderly. "Mama," he said gently, "Carolina's young. Maybe she imagined it." Jenna smiled, small practice dismissive. "These houses creak. Shadows move. You know how it is." I wanted to shout that I did know how it was. I'd lived in this house for 40 years. I knew every creak, every groan in the pipes. But the words wouldn't come. Maybe I said instead, maybe it was the light. They both looked relieved that I'd agreed. But inside, something shifted. A little thread of trust snapped so quietly I almost didn't hear it. That night, after they left, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees. The air was heavy with the smell of sage and wet dirt. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the highway. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the reflection in the window, that faint, stubborn glow from the porch light. I'd forgotten to turn it off again, or maybe I hadn't. There was something about that light standing guard against the dark, even when no one believed me. "Silence," remembers my late husband used to say. He meant it kindly, that quiet keeps our secrets safe. But that night, silence felt like a witness, a heartbeat too patient. I closed the book and watched the yellow light tremble against the night air. Would you have doubted yourself if they told you it was all in your head? Would you have turned off the light, or left it burning just in case? The next morning, I walked through every room again. Everything looked the same, yet nothing did. A chair felt slightly moved. A framed picture tilted by an inch. I told myself it was nothing, the wind, gravity, my imagination. But then I saw it. On the kitchen counter beside my morning cup, a single faint print, small, almost delicate in the dust of flour I'd spilled the night before. Not mine, not Carolina's. I wiped it away before I could think. That day, Mark called to check in. "You doing better, Mom?" "Yes," I lied, "just a silly scare." He sounded relieved. Jenna chimed in from the background, laughing about something I couldn't make out. For a moment, I wanted to tell them about the footprint, about the way the air upstairs still smelled faintly of shampoo that wasn't mine. But I didn't. They'd only tell me I was imagining again. Silence remembers, and sometimes it protects. I hung up, poured myself tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the porch light glowed faintly in the afternoon sun. I should have switched it off. I didn't. That evening, I wrote down everything: the call, the woman in white, the officer's search. Jenna's smile. The pen shook in my hand, but the act of writing steadied me. Proof that I wasn't fading. Proof that I still knew what I saw, what I heard. "If they call you crazy, keep records," I whispered to myself. Maybe that's how it starts for women like me, one doubt at a time until our memories are treated like fictions. But I remember the sound of Carolina's breath, the tremor in her voice when she said, "There's a woman upstairs." That kind of fear doesn't come from imagination. Night fell slow and soft. I walked to the porch, the boards cool under my bare feet. The desert sky shimmered with stars, sharp as glass. I looked up at the small bulb hanging above me, still burning stubborn against the dark. Only special people, my husband once told me, keep the porch light on for the lost. Maybe he was right. Maybe it wasn't just light. Maybe it was a promise. So I left it on. Because somewhere between truth and madness, between what I saw and what they refused to see, there's still a woman upstairs waiting for me to believe her. The air felt warm, heavy, alive. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence breathe. It remembered. And when I turned back toward the house, that small yellow glow still clung to the glass, refusing to die. But the porch light was still on. That night, the wind dragged over the desert roof like rough fingers across bone. The plaster above my bed creaked and sighed, but then I heard something else, light, measured steps padding across the ceiling, as if someone was pacing just above me. I held my breath. The air smelled faintly of dust and rain, the kind that settles deep into old wood. My pulse tapped in my ears. For a long time I waited for the sound to fade. It didn't. It moved, slow, deliberate, then stopped right above my head. And in that stillness, silence remembered. The next morning, the sun broke through like nothing had happened. The kitchen light hit the linoleum in warm stripes, but when I opened the fridge, my heart skipped. The jar of green chili salsa I'd bought 2 days ago, half gone. Mark laughed when I told him, "Mom, you probably ate it and forgot." Jenna smiled without looking up from her phone. She forgets the silliest things lately. I smiled back because that's what women my age are supposed to do when their sanity is being politely erased. But I remembered. I hadn't touched that jar. Later that afternoon, I met Mr. Vargas on his porch across the street. His oxygen tank hissed quietly between words. He leaned closer, voice low. "You know, Mrs. Ellis, your attic light's been on every night this week." I stared at him, the afternoon heat pressing against my back. "The attic light," he nodded, eyes narrowing against the glare. "Yes, even when the rest of the house is dark." The air between us thickened, hot and unreal. For a moment I thought maybe he'd confused my porch light with the one upstairs, but when I turned toward my house, both were off. The attic window sat there black as a blind eye. That night I took out my old notebook, the one with the red spine and frayed corners. I hadn't written in it since Stephen passed. My hand shook as I wrote the date. Beneath it, a single line. Footsteps on the ceiling, jar missing, attic light confirmed by Vargas. I added the time. Then another note, smell of someone's shampoo. It wasn't mine. It lingered in the bathroom, faint but real, like jasmine and rain, like another woman had washed her hair there while I slept. Would you write it down if no one believed you? Would you keep proof, even if it made you feel crazy? The nights that followed blurred together, each one longer, heavier than the last. Sometimes I'd hear the house breathe, the wood stretch under old age. Sometimes I'd hear it again, those steps. Not rats, not pipes. Steps. Once around 2 in the morning, the ceiling cracked with a soft thump, and dust fell onto my quilt. I sat up, heart hammering, whispering, "Enough." But the word died in the dark before it reached anyone's ears. By morning, everything looked so ordinary it felt insulting. The coffee maker gurgled, the kettle hissed, sunlight touched the curtains, life pretending to be normal. But the details betrayed it. A misplaced towel, a faint wet mark near the hallway vent, my toothbrush slightly moved from where I'd left it. Small things, but I see small things. Always have. That afternoon I found a new anchor, my notebook. Each page became a lifeline, a way to catch the truth before it vanished into the gaslight of everyday politeness. Every entry carried its own smell, its own heartbeat. I could almost feel the pulse of the house in the ink. "Silence remembers," I wrote once more, just to remind myself that I wasn't alone in my memory. Because silence doesn't lie, people do. Mark called again that evening. "Mom, you're writing everything down now. You're not obsessed, are you?" I smiled through the phone. "No, honey, just careful." He laughed softly. "You and your lists. You've always been a planner." Yes, I thought, that's why I'm still alive. Outside, the sky folded into the color of ash. I turned on the porch light again, its glow cutting through the twilight like a heartbeat. Inside the notebook, weighted open on the kitchen table, the red spine bent like a back that's carried too much. I stood there for a long while, listening not to the house, but to my own pulse, steadying with resolve. The attic might hold its secrets a little longer, but not forever. Because now I was keeping score. If you've ever felt something wasn't right in your own home, if you've ever been told you're imagining things, tell me. Tell me how you held on to your truth when no one else could see it. Sometimes the smallest proof, a scent, a sound, a note in shaky handwriting, is all that stands between memory and madness. The night deepened. Thunder whispered far away, soft and restless. I opened my notebook, the page smooth beneath my palm, and wrote the words slowly, clearly, the beginning of my evidence. Night 1. The morning light poured through the blinds in narrow ribbons, soft but unkind. I could still smell the antiseptic from the clinic, the faint echo of a nurse's perfume, lemon, and soap. "Your memory's fine, Mrs. Ellis," she'd said, her voice too bright. "You're sharper than most your age." Sharp. Yes, maybe too sharp for the kind of truth no one wants to see. When I came home, the air inside felt damp. Not humid damp like breath lingering too long in a closed room. The bathroom tiles were wet slick with small pools of water glistening under the overhead light. The edges of the mirror were fogged. But I hadn't showered. Not since yesterday morning. I stood there for a long time, my reflection swimming behind the mist. A bead of water rolled down the glass, leaving a trail like a tear. "Pipe leak," Jenna said when I told her. "Old houses do that." Her tone was casual, dismissive. But her eyes didn't look surprised. Mark put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Mom, you worry too much. We'll get someone to check it." I nodded because that's what peacekeepers do. They nod while the ground shifts beneath them. But that night, when the wind rose again, I dragged the ladder from the garage. The attic hatch groaned as I pulled it open. Dust fell like dry snow catching in my hair. The smell up there was strange. Not the usual must of old insulation, but something sweeter. Shampoo. I raised the flashlight toward the vent near the far corner, and that's when I saw it. A strand of long hair tangled in the mesh, pale almost white under the beam. I froze. It fluttered slightly in the draft, alive, like it was breathing with the house. My hand trembled as I reached for it, but I stopped halfway. The air up there felt claimed, not empty. So I climbed down slow and quiet, heart thudding against my ribs like a warning. Would you have reached for that hair, or would you have left it too? Proof that fear has form. The next evening, Mark came by with papers in his hand. "It's just a financial authorization form," he said lightly. "So I can help manage bills if you forget one day." Forget, that word again. Jenna stood behind him, her smile so soft it felt rehearsed. "You know how complicated online payments get, Mom. This just makes it easier." I took the papers, scanned the neat rows of type. My name, my signature line. A trap wrapped in good manners. I smiled back, that small, polite smile older women learn to weaponize. "I appreciate it," I said, "but I'm still paying my own bills." Mark hesitated. "It's just practical." I touched his arm gently. "Honey, practicality is the language of people who want something. What is it you want?" He looked away. Jenna filled the silence. "We're just trying to help." I folded the papers in half, slow and deliberate, the sound of the crease louder than words. "Help," I repeated. "I'll let you know when I need it." After they left, I sat at the kitchen table, the folded papers beside me. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I stared at the ceiling, half expecting the sound of steps, half daring them to come. Somewhere in that silence, I heard the refrigerator hum steady, constant, the only honest sound left. I thought about that hair in the vent, how easily it could have been missed if I hadn't looked up. Sometimes the smallest things are all we have left between sanity and surrender. I took out my notebook and wrote "wet floor." Sweet smell. Hair in vent. Signed nothing. The ink bled a little on the paper, like it too wanted to remember. It's strange the things we start to notice when trust begins to rot. How footsteps linger longer than they should. How smiles start to sound like rehearsed apologies. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my place in their version of reality. "Silence remembers," I whispered. The words felt heavy in my mouth. "Would you have signed just to keep the peace? Or would you hold your hand like I did, still and quiet, pretending to read while your heart took notes? Because peace bought with fear isn't peace, it's surrender with better lighting." That night before bed, I passed by the porch window. The light outside flickered once, then steadied again, golden, patient, familiar. I left it on. It was the only witness I trusted. Somewhere above me, in the darkness of the vent, that strand of hair still hung like a question no one wanted to answer. I opened my notebook again and added one more line. "I'm not blind to signatures." And beneath it, smaller, almost like a prayer, "The porch light still shines." Rain has a sound of its own here, not soft like in the city, but sharp like beads of glass thrown against tin. That night the wind pressed its palm against my windows, and I sat alone under the porch light watching the drops dance across the step. The bulb hummed above me, steady, stubborn, the same one that's watched me longer than most people have. Maybe that's why I bought the camera. $19, discount aisle. Plastic so thin you could almost see the wires through it. But it had a small red light, and sometimes that's all you need to tell the truth from the lie. I didn't buy it for safety. I bought it for proof. I set one camera under the porch, hidden behind the hanging fern. The other near the hallway mirror tilted slightly toward the stairs. They blinked to life, quiet, obedient little witnesses. That night, the rain came harder. The kind of rain that silences everything except itself. I was halfway through a crossword when the motion alert chimed a single soft ping like a heart skipping. I froze. The porch feed lit up my phone screen, the pixels trembling under the storm. And there between the pulses of lightning, a shadow moved. A woman's shape, thin and deliberate, stepping down the stairs with a porcelain plate in her hands, her hair long dark, hanging wet over her shoulders. She paused at the edge of the porch head, slightly tilted, as if she were listening to the rain. Then she vanished. The video was grainy, the image blurred by water streaks, but she was there, real enough to make my breath shake. I rewound, watched again and again. I knew that shape, that stillness. I didn't sleep that night. The rain faded, but the sound stayed inside my chest, steady as guilt. Morning light arrived too clean, too loud. Jenna was already in my kitchen opening drawers like she owned the place. The plumber's bill came, she said, sighing as if my pipes offended her. You really should think about selling, Mom. This house eats money. Her voice had the sweetness of control, the kind that sounds like concern until you look closely. I like it here, I said. She didn't answer, just smiled, poured coffee into my favorite mug, and added, It's just a lot to maintain for one person. I watched the dark swirl of coffee settle. Some things are worth the upkeep. She looked up, her smile tightening. Like what? I didn't answer, 'cause I was thinking of the woman in the video. When Jenna left, I texted Carolina. Can you look at something for me? It took a while for her reply. Sure, Mrs. Ellis. Everything okay? I sent her the still frame, the blurred outline, the wet hair, the white glow of the plate reflecting lightning. Minutes passed before her message appeared. Her hair. It looks like the woman I saw that day. In your house. I stared at the screen until the words blurred into shapes. It wasn't the proof I needed, but it was enough to keep me from doubting myself again. Would you believe a blurry image if it was all you had left to hold your truth? I printed the frame and pinned it to the corkboard beside my desk. The ink bled slightly where the printer sputtered, turning the woman's face into a ghostly smear. The more I looked, the more I felt she was watching me. That's the thing about evidence, it comforts you at first. Then it owns you. Every creak, every gust, every click of the heater became her footsteps. The smell of rain brought her back. Even silence began to breathe with her rhythm. Silence remembers, I whispered to the empty hallway. It always does. When Mark called that evening, I didn't tell him. I didn't mention the video or the way Jenna had glanced up the staircase that morning like she already knew what I'd seen. Some truths aren't meant for those who've already chosen disbelief. So instead, I told him about the rain and how sometimes it sounds like someone knocking long after it's gone. The next day, I caught Jenna staring at the corkboard, the printout. What's this? She asked, voice thin. A memory, I said. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She turned, busying herself with the sink. That's when I saw her hand trembling slightly as she wiped the same spot over and over. Not fear, recognition. Later that night, I sat by the window, the glow of the porch light spilling across the wet glass. The air was thick with heat from the storm still lingering over the desert. The camera light blinked small red alive. I should have felt safe. But safety, I've learned, is a story we tell ourselves to keep from naming the danger by its real name. I looked down at my open notebook and wrote, Rain, shadow, porcelain, her. The pen trembled once, then steadied. If you've ever stared at proof and still questioned your own eyes, tell me. If you've ever felt something true but couldn't make anyone else see it, share it. Because sometimes truth doesn't come loud or clear. Sometimes it costs only $19 and the courage to watch. The night grew still. The air smelled like dust and wet leaves. Somewhere in the distance, thunder whispered like a memory trying to find its way home. I turned off the lamp. Only the porch light and the red dot from that cheap little camera stayed on, glowing together like two tired sentinels refusing to sleep. The image replayed in my mind, her hair, the plate, the pause. And I knew then with a certainty that silenced every doubt before it could speak. She was real. The shadow had form. The proof had a heartbeat. The shadow was true. The scent reached me before the truth did. Soft, sweet, out of place. Jasmine faint but unmistakable, drifting up from the second floor, like the memory of someone who shouldn't be here. My house doesn't smell like that. It smells of cedar polish, old paper, and coffee gone cold. But this was the kind of scent that clings to skin, not furniture. I followed it upstairs, slow and careful, each step creaking under the weight of my suspicion. The hallway was still, but the air felt disturbed, like a breath had just been exhaled and hadn't yet disappeared. And there in the trash basket by the sink was a crumpled bottle of jasmine shampoo. Not mine, not even a brand I know. That night the attic light came on again, a thin yellow glow trembling behind the vent slats. I stood beneath the hatch, the ladder already unfolded. The metal was cold in my hands, humming with the sound of my own pulse. I climbed halfway just enough to hear it. A murmur. 2 voices, or maybe one whispering to itself, soft rhythmic, like someone praying. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the air felt heavy, thick with heat and fear. So I listened instead. The jasmine scent was stronger up there, sweet enough to make my throat ache. I stayed until the whispering stopped. Then I climbed down one careful step at a time, the wood creaking like bones underfoot. Would you have gone up? Or would you have done what I did? Wait and let your silence do the talking. The next morning, Jenna showed up early. She had her efficient face on, the one she wears for banks and doctors. "Mom," she said brightly, placing a folder on the table, "I scheduled an appointment for you with a guardianship attorney, just to get things in order in case you ever need help managing things." I looked up from my tea, in case I need help. She smiled, the kind that looks like kindness from far away. "It's just a precaution. For peace of mind." Behind her, Mark stood silent, his gaze fixed somewhere near the floor. He couldn't meet my eyes. He'd always been bad at lying. I tapped the folder gently. "So you two already talked about this?" Jenna didn't flinch. "We just want to be prepared." Prepared. That word tasted like betrayal wrapped in logic. I smiled, the same polite smile I've been perfecting for months. "That's very thoughtful, dear." When they left, I sat there a long time staring at that neat little folder with my name on it. Guardianship. It sounded like protection, but I could smell the control underneath the same way I could smell jasmine in a house that shouldn't know the scent. I went upstairs again just to be sure. The vent was quiet now, but the faint fragrance still lingered. Whoever she was, she'd been closer than anyone realized, and the light I noticed was off now. But the air held the memory of heat, as if someone had stood there moments before I entered. "Silence remembers," I whispered. I decided then to change the rules. If they wanted to treat me like I was fading, I'd let them think I was. If they wanted to test my mind, I'd give them all the answers they expected, slow, soft, slightly confused. It's easier to move when no one's watching, easier to plan when they think you're harmless. I've lived long enough to know sometimes survival begins with surrender, or at least the illusion of it. Would you play along too if your own children started writing your ending before you'd even put down the pen? That evening I turned off every light in the house except one, the porch light. It glowed steady through the rain, cutting a path through the dark, like a memory refusing to die. I poured tea, opened my notebook, and wrote Jasmine. Whispering. Guardianship. The ink shimmered wet under the lamp. I traced the words with my finger, feeling their truth settle deep under my skin. Sometimes I wonder when love turns into management, when concern becomes quiet control. People don't mean to cage what they love, but cages rarely start with locks. They start with words like, "for your own good." And maybe that's the cruelest kind of care, the one that sounds like love until it's too late. If you've ever been protected until you could no longer move, tell me. If you've ever smiled through fear to buy yourself a few more days of peace, share that silence with me. Because peace isn't always soft. Sometimes it smells like jasmine. Sweet, suffocating, impossible to forget. I went to bed with the window open, the air cool against my face. The attic above was silent, but I could feel it, that faint pulse of presence waiting. The porch light flickered once outside, then steadied again, gold against the night. Let them believe I'm fragile. Let them think I'm losing track. It's easier that way. I closed my eyes and whispered to the quiet, let them think so. And somewhere between truth and pretense, I smiled. I'll let them believe it. The air was thick with cinnamon and deceit. I burned the first pie on purpose that morning, left it in the oven too long, let the crust darken to a crisp, the kind that cracks when you touch it. "Guess I forgot," I said, smiling. Jenna laughed, a bright, satisfied sound. I also lost my spare keys. Took the wrong turn on my way back from the store, called the microwave, the telephone. Small mistakes, believable ones. When people decide you're slipping, they don't need proof, they only need permission. So I gave them just enough. Let them feel safe while I remembered everything. That evening, I invited Carolina over. She came quietly, her kind eyes scanning the corners of the room like a bird watching for shadows. "Mrs. Ellis, what do you need me to do?" she whispered. I handed her a small spool of twine and a few bells, soft silver, no bigger than grapes. "Tie them to this drawer," I said. The one under the cabinet. If someone opens it, I'll hear it from my bedroom." She nodded. The metal chimed faintly as she worked a delicate sound, fragile but true. "Be careful," she said before leaving. "People don't always like when you start noticing." I smiled. "I know. That's why I'll pretend not to." That night I left the porch light on, my only witness golden and steady. The house breathed quietly. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked with stubborn faith. And then, a soft jingle. The sound barely brushed the silence, but I knew it, the bell on the drawer. It rang once, then stopped as if the intruder had frozen mid-act. I reached for my phone, opened the camera app. The porch feed glowed in the dark. At first nothing, just rain light and stillness. Then movement, 2 figures stepping through the side door. One of them was Jenna. The other, an older woman, maybe 58, wrapped in a raincoat that looked too new, too deliberate. Jenna unlocked the door with a small metallic flash. So she did have a key. My key! They didn't speak much, only gestures, a hand pointing upstairs, a nod. Then they disappeared toward the attic. The hallway camera caught the woman's face for a moment, pale, sharp, purposeful. She wasn't afraid. She looked like someone who belonged. I sat there in the dark, every nerve alive. I should have called Mark or the police, but I didn't. Sometimes you need to let the truth stretch itself wide enough to show its own shadow. If I stopped them too soon, no one would ever believe me. So I waited, listened. The faint creak of steps above me, the low scrape of a box being dragged, the soft echo of fabric rustling, all the tiny sounds of a secret being arranged in the dark. And through it all, the steady ticking of the porch light outside. Would you have waited too, just to see who they really were when they thought you weren't watching? I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light broke, I replayed the footage. Every movement, every shadow, every lie now framed in pixels. The woman's coat glistened in the camera flash, expensive, probably Jenna's mother's style. I froze the image, zoomed in. Yes, the older woman was Lorraine. Jenna had let her mother into my house, at night with my key. And they'd gone straight to the attic, the same attic where Carolina once heard someone move. When Mark came by that afternoon, I made sure to play my part. "Sweetheart," I said, touching his arm, "I think I misplaced my house key again." He frowned. "You probably left it somewhere." "Probably," I murmured. "I've been forgetting things lately." He smiled, relieved. "You see, that's why Jenna worries." Worries. Yes, that's what they call it when they plot against you politely. That night I wrote in my notebook again, my handwriting steadier than it had been in weeks. "Jenna has key." Lorraine entered. Bell triggered at 12:47 a.m. I paused, then added, "Pretend confusion continues. Do not confront. Not yet." Sometimes pretending is its own kind of power. People underestimate the quiet ones, especially when the quiet is deliberate. They think silence means surrender, but silence remembers. And it was remembering everything for me. When I lay down that night, I listened for the bell again. It didn't ring. Maybe they thought I'd given up. Maybe they thought I'd forgotten. But I hadn't. Not the scent of jasmine that lingered too long. Not the new dents in the floorboards near the attic stairs. Not the tremor in Jenna's voice when she said "I love you" and avoided my eyes. If your child held your key, but not your trust, what would you do? If your house was no longer yours, would you fight or play along until they slipped? Share that silence with me, because I think you'd do what I did. The porch light burned through the window, warm against the rain. I reached for my pen again, one last line before sleep. Ink against paper, truth against lies. And as I closed the notebook, I heard it, that faint silver sound from the drawer. A bell trembling alive. It rang once, clear as confession. And in that moment I knew. The bell had named them. The day smelled of paper and rain. That kind of damp that clings to your sleeves even after you've stepped inside. I remember the faint hum of the cafe ceramic cups clinking, quiet conversations, the low hiss of steam from the espresso machine. Across from me sat Harold, my lawyer for more than 30 years. Old friend, older soul. His hair had gone from gold to smoke, but his eyes still held the same dry humor. "You always did call me when the world got too loud," he said. I stirred my tea slowly. "It's not loud, Harold. It's slippery." He didn't smile this time. "Then let's make it solid again." We spent 2 hours at that table drafting what he called a living trust. I preferred to think of it as a quiet revolution. My name written in steady ink became my fortress. Everything I owned, the house, the savings, even the silver box of my husband's war medals, was placed under my control again, protected by law and a signature only I could give. Harold slid a second paper across the table. "A durable power of attorney," he said. "You'll still decide everything, but if something happens, the person you choose can act for you." I took the pen, "Then I choose myself." He laughed softly. "That's not how it works, Ruth." I smiled. "Then I choose someone who remembers who I am when I forget." "Carolina," he said without looking up. "Carolina," I echoed. By the time we finished, the sky outside had turned the color of old pewter. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened like the world had been freshly washed of its lies. I walked home lighter, not happier but safer. You see, people think old age is about losing control, your body, your choices, your house, but I've learned something different sometimes. You have to reclaim quietly what others think they're protecting for you. Would you call that mistrust or simply survival? The locksmith came the next morning. A young man, polite, nervous, smelling faintly of tobacco and new leather. "How many locks, ma'am?" "All of them," I said. "Every single door." He blinked, surprised. "Every door?" "Yes." I handed him a small cardboard box. "And replace these too. No spares, not even for family." He hesitated, but his hands got to work. The sound of metal turning against metal filled the house like armor being fitted piece by piece. When he finished, he handed me a new set of smart keys. "Each one connects to your phone app," he said. "You'll get a log every time it opens." I nodded. "That's perfect." When he left, I stood there a while tracing the cold edges of the key in my palm. It pulsed faintly like a heart with a digital beat. That night, I opened the porch app on my phone. The logs blinked in tidy order, timestamps, entries, exits. Everything accounted for. The porch light burned steady through the drizzle. It's strange how comfort can come from something so small, a bulb that refuses to dim even when everything else flickers. "Silence remembers," I whispered to the rain outside. But now, so does the door. 2 days later, I called Adult Protective Services. The woman on the phone had a calm, precise tone. "Mrs. Ellis, could you explain your concern?" "There may be someone staying in my house," I said. "Someone I didn't invite." "Do you feel unsafe?" I looked at the glowing porch through the window. "Not anymore. But I'd like the truth documented." Her pause was gentle but deliberate. "We'll send someone by Mrs. Ellis." That was enough. I didn't need a fight. I needed witnesses who didn't share a last name. When the officer arrived, a woman about my son's age, she inspected the attic, the locks, the cameras. She noticed the twine bells, too, still hanging like tiny guardians. "Creative," she said. "Desperation breeds invention," I replied. Her pen scratched notes, her eyes kind but careful. "You're taking the right steps, ma'am. It's good to stay in control of your home." I smiled softly. Control isn't selfish, it's safety. After she left, I brewed a pot of tea jasmine again, though I never used to like the scent. But now it reminded me of caution, of knowing what's mine. The house was quiet. The porch light hummed faintly, and my door blinked its small green light, showing me that I alone held the code. If you've ever had to reclaim something that should have been yours all along, you understand. Sometimes it isn't paranoia. Sometimes it's the memory of being dismissed too many times. So tell me, when they call it distrust, what do you call it? I call it returning home. Later, as the sun went down, I locked every door twice and opened my phone again. The log was clean, no unauthorized entries. I exhaled. For the first time in weeks, I slept with my window open, the night air cool on my face. The faint glow of this porch light stretched across the floorboards, pale and gold, tracing the outline of my living room, my space, my silence, my safety. It wasn't about walls or locks anymore. It was about boundaries reclaimed, one signature, one bell, one key at a time. The wind whispered outside, brushing against the porch lamp. It flickered once, then steadied again, faithful, warm, eternal. And I thought quietly to myself, this door is mine. The night broke in two with a sound I'll never forget. Click. A soft, almost polite sound, like a secret being unlocked. My phone screen glowed pale blue against the dark. The smart lock log blinked once access code used guest 2. Guest 2. I never made a guest 2. For a moment I just stared. The rain outside whispered against the porch roof, the kind of steady rhythm that hides footsteps. I felt the air change, subtle, heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Floorboards sighing. A slow, careful weight above me. That's when I called 911. The operator's voice was calm, practiced. "Ma'am, are you in danger?" I whispered. "Not yet, but someone's in my attic." "Stay on the line. Step outside if you can." So I did. I wrapped my shawl tighter and stepped onto the porch, rain curling against the edges of my slippers. The porch light cast a warm circle around me, gold against the dark, my little island of safety. I could see my reflection faintly in the window. Calm, controlled, a woman who had already lost too much to panic. When the police arrived, their flashlights sliced through the wet night like blades. "Stay here, ma'am," one of them said. I nodded. The door creaked open under his hand, the smart lock blinking red as if protesting what it had just allowed. I stood on the porch listening. The attic stairs groaned, muffled voices, then a sharp command. "Ma'am, come inside." When I stepped into the hall, the air smelled of cold dust and shampoo jasmine, again stronger this time, almost defiant. And there she was. Lorraine. Her coat wrinkled, her hair uncombed, her eyes wide and small at once. She looked older than I remembered, not frail, but cornered. At her feet, a duffel bag half-zipped, clothes, bottles, sleeping pills. Mom just came by to check on her, Jenna stammered, appearing behind the officer's face, pale but rehearsed. She must have stayed a night or two. It's really nothing. Your mother's been living here, I said quietly, for weeks. Jenna's lips parted, but no words came. One of the officers turned to me. Do you have proof, ma'am? I nodded toward my phone. The lock log. Every entry. Every time she came in at night. He studied the screen, the timestamps, the repeated code used the pattern too precise to ignore. Then he looked up at Jenna. Lorraine muttered, I didn't mean harm. I just needed a place. Her voice cracked like thin ice, but my silence was harder. The attic had always been a place for storage, holiday boxes, old linens, photographs in tin frames. I never thought it could hold a person. But the signs had been there all along: the shampoo, the crumbs, the faint heat at night when no one else was home. And Jenna, my daughter-in-law, had made it possible. She'd opened the door with her own key and called it compassion. The kind of compassion that eats your boundaries one favor at a time. I didn't shout, I didn't curse. I just said I would have helped her, if you'd asked. No one answered. The truth hung heavy between us like a damp curtain that refused to move. One of the officers took down notes. Another snapped photos. The duffel bag looked smaller each time I glanced at it, like the kind of secret that shrinks once exposed to light. When they led Lorraine out, she kept her head down, her hand brushing the doorframe as if she wanted to take something of mine on her way out. After they left, the house was silent again, not peaceful, just emptied. I turned the lock myself. It beeped once, green, secure. Then I walked to the porch, let the cool air touch my face. The rain had stopped, but the world still glistened like it hadn't decided whether to forgive or not. The porch light flickered gently. I whispered to it. You saw it all, didn't you? And in my mind, I heard the echo, silence remembers. People say exposure brings closure, but that's not always true. Sometimes truth is colder than ignorance. Sometimes you don't feel victorious, just emptied, steady alert. Would you have called the police on family? Would you have stood alone in your nightgown on a porch that used to welcome them? I didn't want to win. I just wanted to be believed. That night I replayed the footage again. Lorraine stepping in, the light catching her hair, the porch camera showing Jenna waiting in the car, headlights dimmed. I watched it twice, then once more, not out of anger, out of confirmation. Proof. The kind no one can twist into kindness. The kind that ends a lie gently but completely. I closed the app and turned off my phone. The house sighed, settling into itself, its corners no longer holding secrets. The porch light stayed on unwavering. A guardian now, not a habit. Some truths you don't shout. You just log them one by one until the story tells itself. I stood there a moment longer, the glow soft on my hands. And when I finally turned toward the hallway, I whispered almost to myself. The name has shown its face. The station smelled like coffee left too long on a burner, bitter, metallic, sleepless. I sat on the hard plastic chair, my hands folded, my notebook resting on my lap like a small, obedient witness. The walls hummed with the sound of printers and quiet talk. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and stopped. Jenna was in the next room. She didn't know I was there. Through the half-open door, her voice carried low, sharp, like silk with a hidden edge. She's losing it, she said. We just need legal guardianship in place. Once that's done, we can settle the house situation. A pause, then softer, almost sweet. And since Mom's been staying there, that helps. We can show she's a resident caregiver. I remember gripping the edge of the chair until my knuckles burned. So that was the plan. Guardianship and tenancy, two neat words to erase a life. They would call it care, they would call it family. But it was theft, slow, polite, paper-bound. My whole world narrowed to the smell of ink and betrayal. When Jenna hung up, I didn't move right away. The silence between her words was louder than the phone itself. Silence remembers, I whispered to myself. It always had. Would you have felt it too? That quiet click when love turns into ownership. Detective Owens came out a few minutes later, his expression cautious but not unkind. Mrs. Ellis, you mentioned you had documentation. I opened my notebook, the same one filled with nights, times, smells, lights. My handwriting looked fragile, but it carried weight. Here, I said, handing it over. Every date, every noise, every item missing, and the footage from my cameras, plus the smart lock logs. He flipped through the pages, his brows rising. This is very detailed. I had to remember, I said quietly. No one else seemed to. He nodded almost respectfully. We'll file this with Adult Protective Services. You've done the right thing, ma'am. Right thing. Funny how that phrase feels different when you're doing it alone. Later that afternoon, a social worker from APS joined us, a woman named Patrice. Her voice was soft but deliberate, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. I just want to confirm she said that you're safe staying at home, Mrs. Ellis. Yes, I said, especially now. I handed her a USB drive. That's the video from the porch and the attic hallway, and the logs they show how many nights Lorraine entered. She studied my face as if deciding whether I was lucid or just lonely. I know how this sounds, I said, but I've spent a lifetime being reasonable, and reasonable women get robbed quietly. She wrote that down, word for word. When we stepped outside, the afternoon sun hit like a confession, too bright, too honest. Mr. Vargas was standing by the cruiser, hat in hand. He looked nervous but determined. Mrs. Ellis, he said, I told them what I saw. Every night the attic light was on. I even took pictures from my porch. I felt something tighten, then loosen in my chest. Thank you, Miguel. He smiled a little. You always kept your light on, too. I figured it meant you weren't giving up. The porch light, always shining. A witness older than any camera. Back inside, Detective Owens finished taking statements. Jenna avoided my eyes the whole time, flipping through her phone, pretending indifference. When it was over, I stood. My knees ached, but my spine held straight. Mrs. Ellis, he said, there's enough here for a formal report. We'll investigate guardianship fraud and illegal tenancy claims. You did the right thing coming in. I nodded. I didn't come to accuse anyone. I came to finish a sentence they started. He tilted his head. What do you mean? I'm just writing my ending, I said softly. They tried to write it for me. That night, I sat by the window and watched the porch light glow against the darkness. It wasn't just illumination anymore, it was defiance. Proof that I was still here, still deciding when and how my story would end. The rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, like an old song you hum when you can't sleep. The house smelled of jasmine and cedar, two scents that no longer frightened me. I thought about Lorraine, about Jenna, about how easily affection can disguise ambition. How many families have built traps out of care? How many signatures signed under the name of love? If you've ever been treated like a burden instead of a human being, tell me, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have written too? When morning came, I brewed tea and opened my notebook one last time. The pages rustled softly, the sound of truth being documented. I added the final line, APS notified, log submitted. Vargas corroborated nightly lights. Jenna overheard admitting intent. I closed the cover. The weight of it felt good in my hands, not heavy, just final. The porch light was still on gold and loyal. Some people say justice is loud, but mine was written in ink, sealed with patience and lit by a 60-watt bulb that never gave up. I smiled, small and tired, but free. Because in the end, I chose to write the ending. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and nerves, old air mixed with new perfume, fear, ambition, and coffee that had cooled too soon. I sat in the second row, back, straight hands clasped tight. The marble clock above the judge's bench ticked slow, deliberate, like it knew every truth took its time to surface. Across from me, Jenna adjusted her blazer lips, trembling with rehearsed sorrow. Beside her sat Lorraine, pale, shrinking into her seat, clutching a tissue she didn't use. When the clerk called my name, the sound sliced clean through the room. I stood, calm, steady. It was time to reclaim my name. Jenna went first. Her lawyer's smooth voice, too many smiles painted her words like silk overwrought. My client, he said, has deep concern for Mrs. Ellis's well-being. Over the past months, her confusion has worsened. She's misplaced items, fabricated stories, even accused family of breaking in. Then Jenna lifted a small notebook. She wrote things that make no sense, she said softly. She thought, my mother was living in her attic, the courtroom murmured. The judge lifted a brow. I recognized the notebook. It wasn't mine. When it was my turn, my attorney, Harold, stood beside me, the same man who'd shared tea with me weeks ago while rewriting my future into legal permanence. His voice was quiet, unhurried. Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit A through F. He laid them out one by one. The medical report, no cognitive decline. The camera footage, clear shadows in the hall. The smart lock logs, time-stamped entries at midnight. The photos of the attic, the jasmine shampoo bottle, and finally, my real notebook. The judge flipped through its pages. My words, my handwriting. Steady, chronological, deliberate. Each line a breadcrumb of sanity. Jenna's lawyer tried to interject. Those logs could be manipulated, but the judge raised a hand. The timestamps correspond with the camera data. Continue, Mr. Hale. Harold nodded. We also have testimony from Mr. Vargas, the neighbor who saw the attic light on for several nights, and a report from Adult Protective Services. Their investigation found no grounds for guardianship. The air in the courtroom shifted, a tide turning. For the first time in months, I exhaled without shaking. Would you have waited this long for justice? Would you have trusted paper, ink, and patience to speak for you? Jenna's face tightened. She looked toward the judge with practiced innocence. I only wanted to protect her, she whispered. The judge's gaze didn't soften. Protection doesn't mean possession, she said, and possession doesn't mean love. Her words hung heavy, echoing like a gavel before it ever fell. Lorraine began to cry quiet, trembling sobs that no one reached to comfort. The judge leaned forward, reading the final report. The evidence submitted by Mrs. Ellis confirms sound judgment, stable condition, and intentional documentation of events. The court finds no basis for temporary guardianship. And then the sound. A single heavy stamp. The seal hit the paper with finality, like a bell. Silence filled the room. Real silence, not the one that hides, but the kind that heals. Lorraine's access was revoked that day. Jenna's petition denied. The order was clear, no contact with the property, without written consent. I looked at Jenna as she gathered her papers, hands trembling. "Mom," she muttered, but it wasn't a word of love, it was habit, a reflex. I didn't answer. Some bonds deserve to break quietly. Outside, the sky was soft gray, the kind that comes before peace. The courthouse steps glistened from a morning drizzle. Harold walked beside me, briefcase swinging low, his smile small but certain. "You handled yourself perfectly," he said. I smiled back. I just told the truth. He nodded. Sometimes that's the loudest thing a person can do. We parted ways at this parking lot. I stood for a long moment, breathing in the damp air, feeling something unfamiliar calm that didn't need permission. That night when I came home, the porch light greeted me, still burning, still steady. I let my palm rest against the doorframe, feeling the cool grain of the wood. Inside the house was quiet, not haunted anymore, just lived in. Every corner of it belonged to me again. The clock ticked softly in the kitchen, matching my pulse. Justice doesn't roar. It arrives like this one paper stamped one truth, recognized one silence, finally believed. If you've ever waited for your name to be cleared, you know the sound of breath returning, of ownership restored. I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the porch light glow against the fog. The world outside was unchanged, but inside me the ground had shifted. The court had spoken, but more than that, I had been heard. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady as a lullaby. And when the memory of that gavel returned, that clean, resonant thud, I smiled. Because to me it didn't sound like a verdict, it sounded like a bell. The seal fell like a bell. The afternoon light came through the lace curtains like honey, soft golden tired. It had been a week since the hearing, but the house still held the echo of it. Papers stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. The smell of chamomile tea, the hum of the refrigerator steady as a heartbeat I didn't have to fear anymore. I was washing a single cup when the knock came, gentle, hesitant. Not the kind that demanded, the kind that asked for permission. I dried my hands slowly and opened the door. There he was, Mark, my son. His eyes carried too many sleepless nights, and in his shaking hands, his phone. He didn't speak right away, just stood there trying to find the right place to begin. Finally, he said, "Mom, I need to show you something." I stepped aside. "Come in." He sat at the table where his father once read the paper every morning. The same seat, the same tilt of his shoulders when he was trying not to fall apart. He pressed play. Jenna's voice filled the kitchen, smooth, deliberate, recorded in the quiet trap of a message thread. "She'll have to move out soon, Mark. The papers will make it official. You'll see. Once she's in assisted care, the house is ours. Mom's already half gone anyway." The sound cut like glass. He looked up. "She made me sign some of the documents," he whispered. "Said it was just for tax reasons. I didn't read them. I just signed." I felt the air thicken. "Why are you telling me now?" He swallowed. "Because I was wrong. Because I thought silence would protect us. But silence? It only protected her." His phone buzzed once on the table, Jenna's name lighting up the screen, desperate repeating. He didn't answer. For the first time in months, he chose to let the call die. We sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that hums with grief and relief all at once. Then he said, almost like a confession, I thought I was helping my family. "You were," I said softly. "You just forgot I was part of it." He flinched. Then his hand reached across the table, tentative trembling landing near mine. "I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't just a word, it was surrender. Would you have forgiven him? After everything. After watching him stand by while you were nearly erased. I wanted to be cruel for one breath longer, but cruelty had already eaten enough of this family. He handed me the phone again. There were screenshots this time, messages between Jenna and Lorraine planning timelines discussing staged forgetfulness, medical narratives, emotional pressure. It wasn't just betrayal. It was architecture, a blueprint of deceit. I scrolled my finger, tracing the sentences that once lived under my roof. Every word a small death. Finally, I set the phone down. I didn't cry. Instead, I said, "You'll have to choose now, Mark. Between pretending this never happened and becoming someone your child could one day respect." He looked at me, eyes wet, face pale. "I'll do whatever you say." "No," I whispered. "You'll do what's right. Start there." We walked out to the porch together. The air smelled of rain, not fresh rain, but the kind that lingers after a storm still heavy with its memory. The porch light flickered once, then steadied golden against the gray. He noticed it too. "You still leave it on?" he asked. "Always," I said, "even when I thought you weren't coming back." He nodded, eyes fixed on the glow. It helped me find the way tonight. Silence filled the space between us, gentle, forgiving. The kind that remembers pain but no longer feeds it. Later we sat side by side, not talking, just listening to the quiet hum of the street beyond the trees. The porch creaked softly beneath us. A moth circled the light, persistent, unafraid. He exhaled. "I'll start therapy. Marriage counseling if she agrees. If not," his voice broke, "I'll leave." I turned to him, studying the face that once belonged to the boy who built forts from couch cushions and called them kingdoms. "I don't care which you choose," I said, "only that you don't betray yourself again, or your mother." He nodded slowly. Then, for the first time since he was a child, he leaned his head against my shoulder. We stayed there until the air cooled, until the last traces of guilt softened into breath. Sometimes love isn't forgiveness, it's boundaries built with grace. Sometimes it's a hand held without a promise of repair, only understanding. The night deepened. A car passed in the distance, its headlights brushing the edges of the porch. Mark whispered, "I thought you'd never want to see me again." I smiled, faint but real. "You're my son, Mark. The porch light doesn't judge, it just waits." When he finally stood to leave, the house didn't feel empty again. It felt awake. He paused at the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm still here." And for once I believed him. I closed my eyes, let the sound of his words settle into the walls, into the silence that had seen everything and survived it. The porch light hummed above me, unwavering. And in that moment, I knew the truth I'd been waiting to hear all along. He said, "I'm here, Mom." The desert evening breathes differently when the day finally loosens its grip. The heat doesn't vanish. It lingers in the wood, the porch rails, the bones. But when the first wind moves through, you can feel it, a quiet exhale. That afternoon, I changed the locks myself. The sound of the screwdriver against metal was sharper than I expected. Each turn felt like closing a chapter. Each click, a small piece of peace returning. The old house didn't resist. It just watched me steady and silent, as if saying finally. By the time the sun sank low, the porch light glowed again, a small circle of gold against the coming dark. The next morning, I sold my car. Not the fancy one, just the old sedan Mark used to borrow in his college days. I took the cash, cleared the debt he'd been carrying, and drew up a simple agreement. No more unspoken favors, no more invisible chains. "Here," I told him, handing over the signed copy. "It's a loan, not a rescue. Pay it back when you stand steady. That's how dignity survives." He nodded, eyes glassy but calm. And I thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not grand gestures, just clean, honest terms between two people who've seen too much silence. Would you have done the same? Would you still believe in a sun after the storm? By noon, I hired Carolina. She came back smiling, her hair tied in a red scarf smelling faintly of lemongrass. "Half days long term," I told her. "Just help me keep this place breathing." She laughed. "I like breathing houses, Mrs. Ellis." The attic, once a wound, became her favorite project. We swept the dust, repainted the beams, and turned it into a reading corner. When we hung the wind chime by the window, she asked why I chose that spot. "So it sings when the air moves," I said. "No one can sneak up on a song." She smiled, not understanding the whole story. That was fine. Not everyone needs to know the ghosts they help banish. The days found rhythm again. Morning tea, afternoon letters, and every evening at 5:30 sharp I turned on the porch light. A ritual, not a habit. Sometimes I'd sit under it, notebook in hand, and write about the months that had nearly undone me. The fear, the betrayal, the courtroom, the light that never went out. One night, Carolina leaned on the doorframe and said, "You should share it. People would listen." And so I did. I called it Elderly Stories, a space for voices like mine, older, quieter, but not defeated. The first episode was simple. Just me sitting by the porch telling what it feels like when family becomes a courtroom and silence becomes evidence. I asked listeners, "Where are you hearing this from tonight?" And the comments came. From Michigan, from Manila, from a widow in Perth, from a nurse in Ohio who said she played it for her patients. "If you've ever felt unheard, tell me below," I whispered in one of them. And they did. Thousands of small lights glowing back at mine. It felt like forgiveness multiplied. Weeks passed. The court sent official notice, a civil restraining order. Jenna and Lorraine, both barred from contact from messages from pretending remorse. The envelope came in the mail like a whisper of closure. I didn't celebrate. I just placed it in my drawer beside the wind chime receipts and the old keys, the ones that no longer fit. Justice doesn't roar. It hums quietly through the spaces you reclaim. Mark visited on Sundays now, alone. He helped replace the attic ladder, fix the squeaky door hinge, and sometimes just sat with me on the porch, not saying much. He'd watch the light flicker, then smile. "It's still shining," he'd say. "Yes," I'd reply, "and it always will." He didn't need to know that sometimes when he drove away, I'd whisper to the porch light like a prayer. Stay on for him too. Because light doesn't choose sides. It just reminds us how to find the way back. A month later, I joined the town's elder legal support group. They needed volunteers, someone to help record stories, organize documents, assist others through the same traps I once nearly fell into. I brought my notebook. My porch light followed me in spirit. Every time an older voice trembled saying, "They tried to take my home," I would nod and say, "Then let's start with the truth. It's the only lock that matters." Sometimes they'd cry, sometimes they'd smile, and sometimes when they left they'd say, "You make me feel less alone." That's all I ever wanted. Now every evening when the desert sky turns amber, I sit by the porch and listen to the wind chime. It sings low, steady, a song of movement of air that remembers. The porch light flickers against the horizon, stubborn and kind. I sip my tea, watch the world soften, and somewhere deep in my chest, peace hums not loud, but alive. If you were me, would you turn on your light too? Would you dare let your story shine where others can see? Because stories like lights aren't meant to be hidden, they're meant to guide someone home. And as the last bit of sun melts into the sand, I whisper the same words I've whispered every night since the day everything changed. The porch light is still on.